Dumelang Mzansi, welcome to Farmers Inside Track, Food from Mzansi's podcast. Today we are joined by Dr. Josef de Villiers van Wyngaard, who is the technical manager at Voermol Feeds, as we unpack phosphate leaks and fertility gap that's holding back herd growth in a climate-stressed livestock economy. Dr. Josef, just to get us started, why is phosphate still one of the most underestimated limiting factors in SA livestock productivity?
Thanks, glad to be back. All right, so phosphate is one of our key minerals in South Africa. So why it's underestimated is, remember, it's a mineral we usually refer to macro and trace minerals, two different groups. But the requirements for minerals by ruminants is very low. Or we're talking about very small quantities. So then immediately one would think such a small requirement, maybe we can go without. But as soon as you do that, the impact that, let's say, a phosphate deficiency can have on your herd is rather immense on productivity side. So we're talking about fertility, etc. So you won't see it in the immediate season. Will usually be in the next season when there's a deficit of phosphate. So that's probably why it's an underestimated thing. So it's seen as small quantities, but it has such a massive impact on your herd's fertility over the long term.
And how do drought and fell stress worsen, long-term fertility challenges in herds?
Remember, as soon as plants go into stress, let's say due to a drought, or even a very wet season, that's a complete opposite of a drought, but that's also some kind of a felt stress that can be observed by users. The first thing that happens when a plant stresses, the availability of the nutrients becomes a challenge. Either the nutrients that is pulling from the soil could not be available to the plant as normal during, let's say, drought conditions or over wet conditions. And then at the same time, as soon as a plant stresses, it goes into survival mode. So it will try to bound nutrients, in essence, not making it available to ruminants when ingested. So even though animals will get protein or minerals coming from plant, but if it's a stressed plant, it's not necessarily available to the animal. So stress factors usually have a direct impact on availability of minerals to our ruminants.
Are there any practical signs that tell a farmer that fertility is now being affected by mineral deficiency?
It's a very challenging thing to look out for, let's say, signs of mineral deficiencies. Because usually when you see a sign, which could be in the form of, let's say, your long-term fertility averages going down continuously, that could be a sign, or even growth performance of young animals. And that's specifically referring to, let's say, a phosphate deficiency. When you see the sign, it's already too late. You're probably a year into a deficiency on your farm. So very important with mineral supplementation is to make sure it's always there. Later on, we'll talk about different phases during the year and seasons. But even in your protein leak, which is one of the topics we mentioned previously, there's also a mineral component in the protein leaks and even in the energy leaks, in any leak, to make sure that you do get this constant supply of minerals to animals right through the year, irrespective of the season and felt type. Because the animal will be able to build it up or to store it in its liver or other organs. But there's some minerals that cannot be stored. So that must be supplied continuously. And as mentioned with the previous question, if the plant experiences stress, then there might be a mineral deficiency in a short period during that year. And you won't see that signs or symptoms only when it's too late. So very important to do mineral supplementation right through the year.
I suppose in this case, prevention is better than cure. So now, at what production stage should a phosphate supplementation be introduced for best results?
All right, so for best results on phosphate leaks, that would be in the summertime. So we're referring specifically to the summer rainfall areas, where in the summer you've got your highest rainfall and your veld will usually be green here from October, November, depends on when the first rain comes. That would be your best time to supplement phosphate leaks. The reason for that is, remember, the animal's requirement for now specifically phosphate would vary, depends on the animal's production stage. So during maintenance, that would be during your winter time when you give a protein leak, your phosphate requirement by, let's say, a 500 kg cow would be in the range of 12 grams of phosphate per day. Now, there would be sufficient phosphate in the veld to cover that. In some cases. However, as soon as the animal moves closer to calving, that phosphate requirement can almost double. So it will go up from about 12 grams to 24 grams of phosphate that the animal will require per day to make sure the animal covers the phosphate requirements for not just maintenance, but then for moving over into milk production, prepping for the next mating season. So there's a lot of factors that spikes that phosphate requirement during that time. If you look at the natural calving season in South Africa, that's usually in the end of winter, start of spring. So we're talking about August, September. I know there's some herds that they manipulate, they calve a little bit earlier in the winter. It depends on the availability of obviously your veld management and pastures, planted pastures. And there's other farmers that push it a little bit later, especially if they get later rain. So they might only calve here in, say, September, October. So you can play around with that. That's usually the time when you would like to start with mineral supplementation. However, remember, during that time, the traditional calving time, the grazing is usually at its lowest quality, but the availability is also a challenge that time of year. So then you'll need additional energy on top of your protein. So before you start with a mineral supplement coming out of the winter, you first do a production lick to cover the energy needs and protein needs for that animal. And then as soon as it rains, as I mentioned, then you need to start thinking of, okay, I need to go over to a mineral supplement like phosphate lick. But remember, it doesn't rain grass. So first wait about 2 or 3 weeks after your first good rains for the grass to start turning green, going into a growing phase, increasing nutritional quality. Only then you'll move over from a production lick to a mineral lick. And then you can feed your mineral lick right through the summer, even a little bit into the autumn time as well. So we're talking about from October, November, right through to January, February, even March. Depends on when the first frost comes. And that would be your ideal stage to feed a phosphate leak.
How does a phosphate leak directly solve fertility and herd growth challenges on farms?
That's not new news. There's a lot of research done on the impact of phosphorus or phosphate leaks on reproduction. We're talking about 50 years back or so. There's some major developments in that area. So there's a direct impact on your fertility of your herd. So let's say if you've never done a mineral supplement program, specifically phosphate, and then by implementing that phase into your enterprise, you'll start seeing changes, unfortunately not overnight, but within your next calving season. So you'll most probably need to implement this phase for at least a year, move over into the next production phase of your animal, and then you'll start seeing massive increases in your conception rate, so meaning more calves on your herd. Your conception percentages, wherever it's now, let's say at a lower side of 50 or 60%, you can easily see a 10-15% jump in conception just by correcting your phosphate deficiencies. That's always there. You maybe just never knew about that. So by supplementing phosphate is an easy, quick fix towards your fertility over the long term.
Earlier on, Dr. Josef, you did mention that by the time that farmers see the signs, it's already too late. Why do farmers often only realize phosphate deficiency when losses have already occurred?
For that exact reason, there's such a delay in, let's call it a symptom that's shown by the animal if there's a phosphate deficiency, because some of it is stored, some of it is not stored by the animal, and the usages by the animal is so small. So over a long term, you can imagine that it takes time for that effect to play out, and then you start seeing the symptoms. So if we specifically refer to phosphate, so phosphate can be stored in the liver of the animal. So let's say we don't supplement our animals this year with phosphate. Then the animal will have a little bit of stored phosphorus in its liver to utilize. So that's why you won't see the difference or that challenge the very next day or the very next week or month. Only when the animal's reserves are depleted, then you'll start seeing some negative signs coming through in terms of the fertility going down or growth of young animals, which will go down as well. So it's more to do with how the animal stores the minerals. And some animals can store it better than others. And that all depends on what kind of phosphorus source is used in licks or is available in the plant. So yes, plants can have high levels of phosphorus, but it's not always available to the animal.
How do regional field differences across SA influence phosphate needs?
We all know that the Vryburg area is renowned for very low phosphorus levels in its soil, and that will directly impact the available phosphorus in the plants. And that area is renowned for phosphorus deficiencies in animals. So there's some other symptoms that can be seen in that area where animals will start with joint issues. And that's all to do with that massive phosphorus deficiency in that specific area. But it's not isolated to that area. I mean, South Africa is the whole of South Africa. You will need to give phosphorus during the green season to make sure you cover that gap. So there's literally a gap on what the animal can get from the natural veld in terms of minerals and what the animal's requirement is. And we just need to fill that gap. Just going back to the example of the Vryburg area, in that area, you will need to supplement phosphorus, not just in the green season, but then also in the winter season. So the more severe the phosphorus deficiency in the area, it means that you'll need to try and focus and get phosphorus in your licks right throughout the year. I know also in coastal areas, there could also be some level of phosphorus deficiency. But as mentioned, it's better just to approach it, I like to call it a shotgun approach. So you make sure you cover all possible deficiencies. And that's including not just phosphorus, but all minerals and trace minerals in your lick supplement that you provide. So make sure the lick that you supply contains always a level of trace minerals. And then it depends on what type of lick it is. If it's a protein lick, there should always be a little component of phosphorus and calcium and some other macro minerals in there. And that level will go up as soon as you move over to a production lick. And then at its highest level during the mineral supplementation phase on the green season.
So what mistakes do farmers make when they treat phosphate licks as just another supplement?
I think it's to do with some of the common mistakes that I've seen is lick intakes. So when you move over from a winter supplement where you supplied a protein lick and your lick intake was around, let's say, 500 grams on average per animal per day. And now you move over to a mineral lick or phosphate lick, and then your lick intake will probably go down to about 100 grams. That's just how those licks are designed. And then common mistakes that I've seen is now farmers will realize the intake went down on the lick, even though they changed licks, and they're expecting still to see a 500 gram or 400 gram. Then they would think, okay, the animal does not require this lick, and then they'll probably remove that lick and not supply the lick at all, because the rationale is if the animal doesn't have a good intake on the lick, then animals don't require it. And that's a very wrong view, because with a mineral lick or phosphate lick, it's, as mentioned, those licks are designed at a specific lick intake, which is between 100 and 120 grams, maybe up to 150 grams. Depends on the lick recommendation that's on the bag. And even at those low intakes, that lick supplies the sufficient amount of phosphorus, magnesium, calcium, and all the other trace minerals according to the animal's requirement for that time of year. So don't worry if you see there's a massive drop in lick intake if you move over from a protein to a mineral, or there will even be a bigger drop if you go from a production lick. Remember, production lick intake can range between 1 kg to 2 kgs per annum. Now you move over to a mineral lick and that drops down right to 100 grams. And I can understand that could be a worry if you see that drop, but those licks are designed to adhere to the animal's requirements. That's probably one of the challenges I've seen out there that could be misinterpreted by farmers is the lick intake.
How does phosphate fit into a long-term herd rebuilding strategy after drought?
So phosphate forms part of our 3-phase lick program. So very important to make sure you have a good base of a lick program. And I've mentioned this in the previous podcast as well, but your 3 phases, just going through them again, is your protein phase, which is in the winter. So that's your maintenance or protein lick, and that's usually about 5 months. Then you move over to a production lick during calving. That's only for 2 months, and that's where you supply protein and energy. That phase could be, let's call it your most expensive phase, because your intake will be the highest on those specific licks, but it's the shortest phase. And then from there, you'll move over to your mineral supplement or your phosphate licks, which is also about a 5-month period. So if you implement this 3-phase lick program, you will definitely see, and if you implement it where you never had a lick program before, you'll see jumps between 10 to 20% plus in your conception rates. You'll see 20% increases in your weaning weights of your animals. Your condition of your body condition of your cows will be at peak levels. The whole behavior of the animals will be in a different class. They'll be shining. They won't have these hairy, you get this winter animal where all the hair stands up and it looks really like a scruffy kind of animal. Your animals will look healthy. You'll spend less money on medications to treat diseases or to pull animals for certain reasons. Your animal can only be at its healthiest peak if let's call it your lick phase is in place. And that means you're implementing that 3 phases right throughout the year, even if you've got a good year, meaning you've got plenty of rainfall, you've got plenty of grass, everything is going well. Do not cut your lick program. The animals will cut the intake naturally. So you'll see a decrease in your intakes, irrespective of the lick phase, if it's now protein phase, production phase, or mineral phase. If it's a good year in terms of quality and availability of veld, the animal's lick intake will naturally be lower. So that means the animal is getting sufficient mineral, protein, other nutrients from the veld itself. And during that phase, that is when the animal is building its reserves of trace minerals. So if you cut those licks during that time, you can deplete your animal's reserves, or the animal won't have time to build up reserves. And let's say the next year, when you've got a very challenging year, there's a drought or it's a very wet year, and then there won't be any reserves for the animals to tap into. So even in the good years, make sure you've got your supplemental program in place to cover that and to make sure there's enough reserves built up.
And Dr. Josef, before I have to let you go, I need to know this one, and I believe most of our farmers need to know as well. If you had to recommend 1 or 2 Voermol products for farmers who are dealing with fertility and head growth pressure, what would they be and why?
We've probably got about 4 Voermol products specifically in this mineral range, in the phosphate range. I'll go by them one by one, but let's start with the most practical kind of supplement, and that's our Voermol phosphate block. So it's we call it a ready mix supplement, so you don't need to mix anything. It's in a block form, so it's weather resistant. And it's something that you can put out and leave it there for weeks in the veld without worrying about, let's say, baboons stealing the lick, or warthog stealing the lick, or heavy rains that actually washes away the lick. So your Voermol phosphate block is the ideal one for challenging areas. Let's say there's a lot of mountains, there's a lot of hills, you can't get your animals every day. That would be your go-to block. It's not just high in phosphate, it's very high in your magnesium, sulfur, calcium, and then all 7 of your essential trace minerals. And all of those talk to fertility in your animals, and then at the same time, growth in your young animals as well. If we then move over to another ready mix option, which is in the meal form, is our Voermol Superphos. That's part of our flagship range at Voermol. And why I say that is that's one of our products that also contains organic trace minerals. If you know you've got a challenge of trace mineral deficiency, that would be your supplement to go with. It's not that resilient in the weather as our phosphate block, but the other advantage with Voermol Superphos is it does have a protein component in as well. So it supplies all your macro and trace minerals, and it supplies a little bit of protein. So this one is reserved for areas where you know you've got a protein challenge in your veld, even in the summertime. So let's say maybe sour veld areas could be a target for the Superphos product. It's very palatable, highly palatable, so you get good intakes, and it's got a low salt inclusion there. So especially in areas where there's high salt levels in the water or in the soil, and you do have a challenge on lick intakes, this would be the lick to go with. And then our last ready mix one option is Voermol Removite P6. So it already contains a 50% salt component so that you can feed directly out of the bag, also in meal form. It does contain all the macros and trace minerals as mentioned in the previous 2 products, but then it contains vitamin A as well. And then there's a self-mixing option with our Voermol Removite P12, and there you basically just add your own salt. So it's 1 bag P12, 1 bag salt, and then you basically make your own P6. And your intake on all 4 of these products for cattle will range between 100 and 150 grams. For your small stock, all these products are also safe for small stock, so your goat and your sheep. And the intake there will be much lower compared to the cattle. They probably take about 20 to 30 grams, that product per day. With these 4 products, you'll cover your mineral deficiency gap in your area, and at the same time then also addressing any fertility issues in your animals over the long run, and also ensuring that your young animals, let's say your young heifers, maiden ewes, even calves with cows, that they will grow stronger and wean heavier at the end of the day.
That's it for today's conversation on phosphate leaks and protecting reproduction in your herd. Thank you, Dr. Josef, for joining us. I'm Isakanya Vena. This is Farmers Inside Track, Food from Zanzi's podcast in partnership with Voermol Feeds. We'll see you next time, Zanzi.